Hi, my name is John Light, and I've spent over 20 years working throughout all corners of the recruiting world. Our podcast, Drowning in the Tech Talent Pool, is a resource to help you stay afloat and get ahead of your competition. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Drowning in the Tech Talent Pool. I'm your host, John Light, CEO and President of Sabretooth Recruiting, Inc. And with me today, and somehow I got on this kick. Well, I know we have this common thread of talent that runs through everything we talk about on the show. Today I have with me a gentleman named Steve Busby. And what's unique about Steve, and I want to ask him to explain this in just a minute, is he's a founder and managing partner of Slate Point Partners, and they're an advisory firm focused on revenue benchmarking and advisory. So, number one, welcome, Steve. Glad to have you here, and I'm hoping you can break this down for us a little bit, because with the market changing and all the evolutions we're going through, whether it's because of the advent of technology like AI or just people having different educational backgrounds and life experiences compared to 30 years ago, I'd love to know more about not just revenue benchmarking, but how does a company survive and how does a company enhance and improve their revenue today?
Yeah, no, thanks, John. I appreciate you including me. A big question to lead off, but at Slate Point, which is a new entity, but it's really shaped around that question. But if you put revenue on a whiteboard, and you say, okay, we've got a revenue target, everybody has a revenue target, it's X percent higher than where we are today. Companies do varying degrees of sophistication and wellness at blueprinting exactly how they're going to get there.
Right.
But what is revenue a function of? And we ask that question, and then we start, the obvious answers, sales, and pop up, but you get into things around process, culture, alignment, how well you're leveraging your data assets, a whole series of things that everyone knows are important, but they're not on anybody's KPI dashboard because they're really hard to measure. So our mission was to define those things, which ones are correlated to and drive revenue, and then come up with a framework that actually scores them and scores a company based on its maturity, based on its industry, based on its size, based on its growth objectives, to sort of say, hey, there's two dimensions. There's you relative to where you should be, a peer group, and there's you relative to potential. How good can you be? What best in class? And really helping companies understand which of those levers have the biggest gap, meaning the biggest opportunity. And then that's the easy part. The hard part is, okay, help me actually affect change and operationalize that. So when you're talking about getting sales and marketing more aligned, getting the IT function more business driven and less tech driven, all those things that everybody knows are important and cause lots of problems. But, how do you, again, tie all that together, get people to know it's important, and then drive a comprehensive change plan? And that is revenue operations, right? And it varies by company. There's no, this is RevOps and you plug it in. You have to understand what that is for your company in order to get to your question, which is, what's the new definition of revenue? Because some of the old paths of hire more salespeople and, they don't get you there in today's market where you've got to compete a little bit.
I think that may be one of the biggest nuggets right there at the end, is that you just can't go hire more salespeople. You just can't throw more pay-per-click campaigns out there and expect to get increasing results. You get diminishing returns. And sometimes you don't even get that, and I think a lot of it goes to now that information is so in your face every day. You have it in your phone, you have it in your tablet, in your laptop, on your TV, if you even have a TV. Some people just watch their computer monitors, right? We're taking in this information differently. And I think consumers, B2B and B2C, are starting to make decisions based on how they feel holistically about a product or a company or a pitch person, whatever it might be. And so I think there are several great lines that we got to try and cover it here. I don't know how we're going to do it to the depth that we need to do it in this conversation, but let's start with maybe some of the things that are difficult to measure. And one of the things that jumped out to me is you mentioned culture. And when you start talking about different groups within a company, especially a bigger company, when you're in a smaller company, someone like you or me, we could wear a half a dozen different hats, areas of responsibility every day, because our area of responsibility is our business, not just a segment or a slice of the pie. So we recognize the importance of getting to that end goal of having that incremental dollar hit the door. And we're willing to do whatever we need to do within reason, legally, ethically, morally, of course. Wait, that's the Boy Scout thing, right? Or I forget, whichever it is, to get that incremental revenue amount in the door. But how do you align culture in a mid-size or a large-size company where sales and marketing have been treated as disparate functions for a long time versus operations and, let's say, customer service also treated as disparate operations within the overarching company? How do you begin to approach that? Because I don't know how you'd measure it.
It is a challenge, and you hit on a key element, which is you have to do it holistically. If you go in and just say, okay, we're going to look at sales culture, we're going to look at culture within IT and market separate, you get a tiny piece of the answer and maybe a false, a false positive or false conclusion. So what Slate Point does, and it may not be the only way to do it, but we observe and we talk to people. So you ask questions around, what is the mission of the company? Do you believe, what are your core values? Do you believe in the core values? How well does management communicate change? There's a whole series of sort of proven questions that you can ask across all those functions. And most often, if not always, you sort of get different answers, right? So the inconsistency
I bet you do.
But also if people say, yeah, I understand the strategy, the CEO gets up there and says, we've got this goal and we're going to hit it, and everyone's excited. And you say, do you believe it? Well, not really. Well, where do you think it's going to fall short? And, is it because of selling? It's usually something in the engine room around our ability to innovate, around our ability to communicate product changes to customers, around our ability to manage, so there's those things that are in your bucket of hard to measure. But the first step in all cases is you just have to be honest and get the blunt truth and put it on the table to see if what is your culture? And what degree is it aligned with execution, understanding and execution of the strategy and the customer. I continue to be sort of shocked every time we do an assessment around everyone's website says, we're here for our customers and we're customer-centric. But are the behaviors of the organization manifesting that? Are the way people paid manifesting that? And once you break it down, you realize this is structurally set up to not serve the customer. It's for sales to sell as much as possible, for this group to manage risk, this group to do this, and all good intentions. But in that, the customer gets lost. And one more example, we're doing one now for about a $10 billion company that everybody's heard of that you would think is a tech leader, and that they didn't have a customer lifecycle map. Operate in silos, sales does its thing, product does its thing, and there's natural abrasion. But the whole concept of, hey, who's looking at who do we target? How do we attract them? How do we onboard them? How do we upsell? How do we make them advocates? Was a foreign concept, and it was just eye-opening. They're scrambling now to implement. I think it's going to have a huge impact, but you get a lot of sophisticated companies that aren't doing some of the the basic principles to
the fundamentals.
Understand, do we have alignment issues, and where in that game plan do we have obvious holes we need to address.
Well, I imagine one of the hardest things you got to do is convince somebody who's been running their own department, their own team for a while, maybe a product development function, right? And they're really, really good at it. They do a really great job. And like you said, they got bazillions in sales. Hey, you're not really interfacing and pulling the wagon in the same direction as everyone else. I imagine those are some, I imagine there's a lot of entertainment value in those conversations, so to speak. How do you overcome that from getting people not necessarily to realign? Because I don't think that's necessarily the case, because the alignment that's evolved in that situation may have evolved over time, and there was never an alignment to begin with. There were aligned interests, but now those interests are divergent in some respects, where I need to sell, And by the time you get down to budget your customer service and enablement, you pay those people probably as little as you can, because you look at them as a cost center. But what I'm hearing from you, I hear you inferring is that, why is this a cost center? This is customer facing. They're getting great data. They can provide great feedback to product, to sales, and everything else along the way. How do you get people not just to realign, but to align, to believe strongly enough to align that this is going to make a massive difference for the organization?
Yeah, you're correct that's the root, first step. But typically the most effective way is to just, using your product example, okay, you're in charge of product. What does success look like for you? Well, we create innovative products. They're the best in the market, or we bring them fast. Right. Customers love them. And you said, okay, great. Let's talk about how that happens. And would more intelligence from the service folks that are talking to customers and dealing with product problems, getting that feedback in your process, would that be helpful? Yes, it would be. Okay, how often do you meet, or do you have a formal mechanism to get that feedback from service over to product? No, we don't. But if you can align it with what they want and say, great, if sales, what would you want out of sales to sell your product more? Great. Well, right. What we're hearing from sales is that they don't have a lot of visibility and development pipeline. So they're left scrambling sometimes when there's great new launches. So they could sell more if you spend a little bit more time up front prepping about what's coming. And here might be some FAQs. And, does anyone have any questions about the launch dates? And if we check this is going to work in Japan, and all that stuff that typically gets lost. But if you can identify what those, functional objectives are, and then tie them together, and then everyone can see how the other people in the team can help them win. And you're 100% right. That's not hitting the easy button, but that's sort of where you have the aha moment when they see the business differently and see their teammates differently, and it's incredibly positive. And leadership starts to swell a little bit, just the tear in their eye type of thing, because it's what they've always wanted.
If you want to make your investors have a tear in the eye, you hit those numbers and exceed those numbers, and they'll have some tears.
But you're right. It's usually, whip the horse harder. And, if you don't get there, then we'll start taking out costs, and, we're going to get to our bottom line. But how sustainable is that? And, companies have a real problem. If you get honest with the morale, why are you working here? Well, pay's okay, and I'm not sure I can find another job, and I've got 2 kids, and, it's not because I love the mission and I love why. Some companies have that for sure, but a lot of companies, great. If that's your dynamic, let's talk about this team going on the field and winning. And you say you want to be good at innovation.
Reminds me of that T-shirt I saw. It has a pirate theme going on, and it says the beatings will continue until morale improves. And
exactly.
I've got a couple of teenage boys in football now, organized football at the school, junior high school, for the first time. They've played other sports. They've done 7-on-7 and basketball and track and all this other stuff over time. And it's so interesting watching them learn their limitations and how they need to depend on the guy next to them to do their job. Because you got 10 other guys on your side of the ball on the field at any given time. And if you're the quarterback, you better hope and pray your O-line actually does her job. If you're the receiver, you hope and pray the quarterback delivers the ball accurately and on time. If you're a running back, well, just run like Satan's after you. Otherwise, you're going to get hammered. And you can go through this over and over again. These kids are learning, but they get up into the corporate ranks later on in life, because most are not going to be playing at the NFL or even at college, so they're going to have to figure out a vocation or a technical skill set, and they're going to go forward in their careers and often land in companies that kind of reflect George Washington's comments when he left office about not entering into long-term entangling treaties and alliances with foreign countries, but rather to look for an alignment of interest. And that alignment lasts however long it lasts. It could be a day, it could be a year, it could be decades, who knows? But you entangle yourself in such a way, when those interests diverge, then you no longer are going in the same direction. And I think a lot of companies have fallen into the trap where, to your point, I want more of this. And so I'm going to incentivize the daylights out of this, but I've neglected the rest of the body, the rest of the team.
Right.
And as a result, they don't recognize, because they're hitting their numbers, I could probably be doing 30% more reps. And I could be dropping a ton of it to the bottom line if I'd approach this holistically, looking at this as a true team instead of a have and have not sort of scenario. So I find it fascinating, frankly, because to me, that problem and part is strategic, but a lot of that too is people.
It is. At the end of the day, it's how well teams work together on a common mission and make each other better. And the sports analogy is spot on. But one of the key things, and you mentioned this, is everyone knows assists are important, but how do you think about compensation for assists versus goals?
Yeah.
And it's always geared towards the goal scores, but what wins championships in a lot of team sports is those assists and the blocking and the defense, and getting that balance right. So you can tell a lot once you start looking at stated goals and then functional goals and individual goals, and the degree to which those are aligned with the team outcome. And most of the time you see some, that
it's funny you say that. One of the lowest paid positions on a professional American football team is the long snapper. The guy hiking the ball to the guy who's going to hold the ball for the kicker to put it through the field, or to the punter, to punt the ball. Never notice this guy unless he happens to hustle downfield and make a tackle, unless he screws it up.
Right.
And when he screws it up, do you think next guy up, or do you think maybe we need to pay someone more who's going to perfect the craft and do it right every time? Maybe we need to change how we look at this and say we need somebody who's a dedicated craftsman, so to speak, just like you have for a place kicker.
Right.
And your soccer analogy or basketball analogy, whichever it is, it's great to score goals, it's great to score points, but every great scoring leader, they have a team around them that supports it. I mean, I remember the Bulls back in the 90s when Rodman was on it. I don't know if Rodman could make a shot. But I'll tell you what, no one is going to out-rebound that guy, and he's going to fight you for every inch of it, and he's going to feed that ball back to the offensive end of the court and give his team more opportunities to have a chance to score. And I wonder just sometimes if we look at that through the right lens, because most people coming into companies, by virtue of wherever it is they start, if they're not starting up at the top, or at least the upper middle part of the company, they're starting in an individual contributor role, and they can't see the forest for the trees. And it's not their fault.
No, it's and that's one of the things we look at is, let's talk about employee onboarding and ramping and the cross-functional training, and it's usually marginal or within the function. We were with a big $50 billion company last week in Chicago with their finance team, about 60 people in a room. And the CFO, his credit was like, listen, we need to start thinking about, because we want to put in new forward-looking KPIs. And we know that we need to know a lot more about what sales does, what marketing does, what service does, what product does. And quickly got out, okay, what do you do now? And zero cross-functional awareness and training. And, part of that session was for people from the functions to get up and talk a little bit. And everyone was like, oh, that is so helpful. That's incredible. I had no idea that marketing did that. And it's not.
I thought you guys just gave us swag. I thought that was what you did.
It's amazing, and every company's different. I think part of me says it's probably easier if you're a smaller company, because you don't have to unpack and repack as much as a bigger company that has to change some of the inertia and culture and reasons why things are. But it's a mission that I think every company should at least ask themselves. Do we want to think about that holistic, cross-silo, customer-centric view of our business and be honest about it? But if you're going to win long-term, I think you have to.
So I imagine you and I could agree very easily that mid-size and larger companies, this is something you need to do. It makes sense. You've got the resources to do it. Your longevity, your long-term survival and success depends on your ability to adapt, and this is where the market is going. But you just mentioned smaller companies. Well, maybe it's easier for them, but what if that F&A team, instead of 60 people, was 2.5? What if that sales and marketing team was a sales manager with 3 sales reps and a part-time marketing position. I mean, how do you help someone like that? I mean, what can they do to take on a more revenue enablement centric approach to their business and how they run it so that it has a chance to ramp up and be of greater significance down the road?
I think they're doing more rev ops because they're small and they sit next to the person in another function. So we don't look at it as much as needing to implement mature rev ops as much as your scale path and what are the structural risks, which are operational related. But going in and saying, people think the head of sales is brilliant, but the 2.5 people that report to him think he's a complete, untrustworthy, slickster.
Right.
With everyone with the incentives, great, we can live with that. But if you go to the CEO and say, okay, how sustainable is that? At some point, that dam is going to break, or, your IT function, is it able to keep up? Yes, they can service the business now, but your plan says you're going to be at 40 million. And, is that going to be there? So you're looking for those kind of scale operation, rev op scale things to identify as early as possible, because everyone lives with when the pipe breaks, you know about it and you fix it. But, be nice to know 12 months in advance that, the more water we put through that pipe, here's the probability it's going to break, and we predict it's going to break on this date. And whether that's your, recruiting function, whether it's IT, whether it's product development. And I think very few companies are focused on that, how good and long-term is my infrastructure to support my growth strategy. But that's an operational assessment about people, about teamwork, about alignment.
Right.
Do you have that chassis?
How do you approach a company wherein, they've carved out the budget and the time and resources to enhance revenue operations? All right. They bring you guys in and they say, all right, hey, we want to accomplish X. And you're like, well, here's the roadmap to get to X, and here's what it's going to take. And you sit down and do it. You get to the end of that roadmap, and a portion of the people involved deliver a pocket veto. They're just like, they're going to, what is it? The working quitters, or whatever the term is, the quiet quitters. And they're not doing the things necessary. I mean, and I know it's hard when you're in an advisory capacity, right? But suppose whoever brings you in says, look, we need help. What do you think our next step should be to remedy this? How do you approach something like that? And what do you think usually your top challenges are that prevent this from getting the traction and the longevity it needs to really make a difference?
Good, great question. And I'll give a little adjacent, preamble, but the amount of times we hear and see, yes, C-suite hired a consultant did strategic plan was presented and sat on said shelf because of exactly that. There was no buy-in. There was, that's easy for them to say, but I'm the one that has to do it. There's no, bleeping way. So we sort of go to the other end. So if we get a mandate from a C-suite that says, hey, come in and, look under the hood, go right into the engine room, right to the shop floor, and kind of say, hey, how are you seeing the business? Where are the opportunities? What do you think? What's it going to take to succeed? And we're taking notes. But through that engaged process, when you come back and you say, what you told me, this is now in the deck on page 1 as a feature recommendation. So it's not a 100% foolproof for buy-in, but we find it's a whole different dynamic once you get to the implementation phase, that their fingerprints are on it. My voice was finally heard. So we're trying to tap into that. I wish those, dopes in management would listen to us, right? There's always that around the water cooler.
That's on page 2.
How do you turn that into an asset? And sometimes there can be a disconnect that people think, oh, if we only raise prices, or if we only did this. So we've got a lot of times bridge reality. But even if they're heard and you can get back and say, yes, price increases will get X% of the way there, but we have to make some operational changes, and they can see that blueprint. Okay, but that ownership gets it is like a epiphany around the getting down to the VP and below level, where they're excited and it's their baby versus somebody else's kid that's screaming that I've got to take care of.
Right. Well, give them sugar and hand them back to their parents. How deep do you go? I mean, if you're in a smaller medium organization, you're going to go pretty deep down the org chart. How deep do you go in the org chart for a 10 or 15 or $50 billion client? I mean, because at some point you can only go so deep, and you've got to make decisions on, we're going to talk to this person in this area and not this one and not that one, but these two over here. I mean, how do you go through that calculus and figure that out to be as effective as you possibly can be?
It's a collaborative process with the client. And one of my favorite things to do is to say, okay, you understand the mission. Who do you think we should talk to? And what I'm always looking for is you don't need to talk to them. And then circle that to say,
that's the one I want to talk to.
So you feel it out, but this is done self-serve online for a lot, so we can do huge scale interviews. So if someone says, I want you to talk to every single salesperson, every single service rep, that's possible. We'll typically get in no, we don't need to. If you've got 100, we can talk to 10 to 20 and, look at that. If we see interesting results and need to do more, fine, we can call that audible, but let's dip our toe in. So it's a case by case thing, but you want, to your point, get that cross-functional representation, dip your toe in all those pools, and then you can say, water's fine, really strange over here. And do we want to dig down a little deeper? But you're looking for the consistency. You talk to 10 people in sales and you get 10 different answers versus 2, you're already learning.
Well, see, that's one of the things I look for when I interview a candidate is consistency. And I refer to it internally as integrity, right? And integrity really is not describing someone being honest or not. Integrity just means it's the same inside as you are outside. If a ship loses hull integrity, it ain't the same throughout. It's sprung a leak somewhere, you got a problem. And when I interview a candidate, I look for integrity of their decisions and how they made those decisions. What pulled them to a new opportunity, what would have pushed them away from it, what pushed them out of where they're sitting, what might still keep them in there, what are their pushes and pulls. I want to understand that, because if I see market differences from job to job, career transition to career transition, in their priorities and how they come to the decision, that's a big red flag. That's a huge red flag. And I think what I'm hearing here is this is a red flag. We interview 10 people and we get 2 or 3 who are somewhere in a different zip code. Well, that's an issue. And that issue could be, if I could say it, people, process, or technology. It could be one of those 3 things typically. But I wonder, when you look at client companies and where you can be most effective, is there a sweet spot for an organization to undertake an endeavor to improve revenue operations and their life cycle and their scope and to whatever it may be?
I don't know yet, because I think it is valuable at we've done them for companies that are 1 million and, up to north of 50 billion. And I think there's been, different value in each case. Sometimes it's just, game plan, and you communicate it and understand, here's what we're doing and why, it's a team sport, and why, your role and how it relates to making someone else successful over here. Because everybody's running fast, they're busy, they're hiring. And sometimes you lose sight, if you're on the small, high growth end, of, how all the pieces are going to fit together. And, the often used Frankenstein problem that, you're bolting on stuff and, you do it and you think it's good. But then after a while, you take a step back and say, what did we build here? Sometimes people don't care because they're long gone if they've gotten their money, but, presumably someone wants long-term success. So I think the approach varies. And you don't need to do, full extensive audits in all cases. But it absolutely has value, even if it's just management sort of reinforcing that, everyone should know what everyone else does, and all should be linked back to the customer. Like one of my peeves is, if you get into the IT department and you're really looking for business knowledge and business-driven decision-making supported by good technology selection, and usually it's, somebody who's brilliant, knows all the latest features and knows what Gartner said and all that stuff. But, did you actually talk to people that are going to deploy this and understand, that X percent's probably never going to be utilized, or this is going to be a problem. I mean, some organizations are certainly good at it, but that's a self-inflicted wound that I think that happens a lot because people are looking for someone that, knows SQL but knows all this stuff, as opposed to someone who's really good at, building teams and really good at, having the domain knowledge and other things. I'd much rather have, to your point, that good, good athlete that's got an open mind and good values. They'll learn some of the technical stuff, as opposed to somebody that's, overly technical but doesn't understand the team elements.
Coachability is a high factor in my book, and exactly. We could rephrase that, and continuous learning and however you want, but coachability, because learning from a book or a video is one thing. Learning because a person slaps you as something that you perceive as negative or as a criticism or even as a personal attack, you got to see past that. And that's hard. That's hard for organizations as well as individuals. Let me ask you this, Steve, because this is a relatively new space in terms of being formally defined as revenue operations and whatnot. When a person looks at an organization, whether they're leading it or they're a part of it, what do you think the key trigger is that if they see, it's like, okay, we need to investigate this area of holistic revenue operations versus we need to put the gas down on sales or throw more coal in the fire in marketing, or maybe we need, to your point, we got to hit our numbers, so let's cut some money out of customer service or warranty services, whatever it may be. Is there a telltale that an executive can keep an eye open for and say, man, we got to address this?
The best one in my experience, if you can get honest answers, and sometimes the C-suite, gets what they, people think they want to hear as opposed to the truth. But if you're asking someone what motivates you, and pick a function, pick a level, but the degree to which that response is based on the customer, on the core values of the company, all the things that are on the website, versus more often than not when you get a different answer, that we're trying to do what our functional objectives are, but they're disconnected. That disconnectedness, to me, is a red flag. And usually if they're disconnected there, then they're not connected, because they're not thinking about the customer. So they're not thinking about the various stages of the business and how that customer touches the business. So they've got a silo problem. But involuntary turnover, I mean, there's traditional metrics that a lot of people look at, but I think you can get false, diagnostics about, our comp is too low or other things. But, usually you at the end of the day, it comes to, a culture. I love what I'm doing. I'm making a difference. I'm working with people I like to work with. Those things are really important. And it's easier, to your point, I think, when you're smaller and the CEO can walk around and, how was your day? How was your son's birthday party type of stuff. But as you get bigger, the degree of difficulty gets higher.
Yeah, and you actually need people.
I think you hit it. Just if you get the right, values, coachable, your odds of success are going to go way up.
I think you just gave one of the most amazing answers I've heard in a long time to a basic question. How do you know something's wrong that you need to fix? And because that's what it boils down to, right? And it comes down to, are the people and your processes, the technology, your goals, are these things in alignment or not? And I'm not talking about alignment where, okay, everybody has to memorize our mission statement and everybody has to know our core values by heart. That's not alignment to me. Alignment is when you're talking to that person, they're like, not only am I a part of this mission, my goal is to deliver the most excellent service we can, or to deliver the most innovative products whatever that is that drives, you want the organization to truly be about. It can't be a 21-point bulletin. It can't be, 10 things or 5 things. It's got to be that singular, or maybe 2, but it's very narrow. And that way people can contribute without being caught in these narrow lanes, so to speak. And bring cognitive diversity to the forefront, and to where you can mix it with other people who maybe don't think the same way you think, and come up with the end result because you do believe in the same mission, the same goals. And that's
exactly,
if you can define that, and you see that's disconnected, and these people are here because they're pirates, going back to the pirate analogy with the beatings will continue. And then you got a big major problem you need help with.
Yeah, exactly. And that's, when our standard process, that the first question we ask is, tell me your understanding of the, mission and vision of the company. And then, okay, great. And you're comparing how consistent that is, but then quickly followed by, do you believe it? Is it in your heart, in your soul, in your attitude every morning you show up? And usually, okay, well, where are you concerned? And you peel the onion and, I'm, this function, that function, this leader, you start to just get honest about what the issues are. And the beautiful thing is the answers are usually within the company, right? If you really could listen at the water cooler and, I just wish those, again, the bleeps in the corner office, you can get, and some organizations are good at getting that feedback and quickly incorporating it. And others are sort of selectively, I only want good news. And if you bring bad news, there's repercussions.
It's tough when something you feel like is assaulting your ego or your pride and joy. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But Steve, I want to take a minute here at the end just to say thank you for sharing so much, because we covered, I don't know if you realize this or not, we covered a lot of territory. When you really think about it. And I think this is one of these areas that people need to become more aware of. You brought up the old point from Deming, I think earlier. You got to be able to measure something so that you can improve it. You got to measure it if you're going to manage it, if you're going to make it better. I'm not sure. I think trying to define contribution, let's just say economic, we use dollars to define economic impact or economic value. Defining that across all functions in an organization towards a common goal, I don't know the formula for that yet. I'm not sure that anybody does per se, because I think if we did, salespeople might be really disappointed with what they actually earn versus marketing versus customer service versus the guy on the manufacturing floor, putting screws and bolts together. And I think this is part of a process that as industry evolves and businesses evolve, there's going to be a thinning of the herd, and there's going to be a real focus on candidates and leaders who can bring the holistic view, not just onto the table or into the mix, but also get buy-in. Because at the end of the day, people do business, and people do business with people. And if you can get the people to buy in, your process and your technology will follow suit, in my opinion. So I think what you're doing and the space you're playing in is brilliant. I think it's needed. And I just want to say thank you, because there's a lot of great information that you gave to us that we are going to get to share out with our network. So thanks for joining us today, Steve.
Great. No, you're welcome. And you just triggered a final concluding thought.
Yeah, please.
If I can squeeze it in. But, every company's, I think, pretty good at, what are the outcome metrics we want, ARR, revenue. Great. But what this whole shift is about is, okay, let's get a layer below that and look at the behaviors, the processes, the beliefs that enable those. And that's what ultimately, you put a number on that and manage it. And if you do that right, then the outcome metric, it's going to take care of itself. And it is a change. And it's exciting to sort of see it, kind of snowball and keep getting momentum. But yeah, that's the talent of the future. I think we'll get that.
Awesome. Amazing. Steve Busby, Slate Point Partners, thank you so much. And if somebody wants to get a hold of you, they can call me. I'll tell them how to do it, or they can find you on LinkedIn. I know. I look forward to having a conversation again in the near future, Steve. Thanks so much.
All right. Terrific. Thank you, John.
You've been listening to Drowning in the Tech Talent Pool. This podcast is sponsored by Sabretooth. Sabretooth improves the quality of hire and speeds up the time to fill specialized machine learning, data engineering, data science, and developer roles, stretching tech recruiting budgets further by bringing the precision of retained search and the speed of contingent search to the market in one complete solution. Find out more at sbr2th.com and follow me, John Light, on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening.